On this episode of Newt's World, on March 5th, Open the Books released a report entitled University of Virginia Spends $20 million on 235 DEI employees, with some making $587,340 per year. The report is just astonishing. For a public university to be spending this much of the taxpayers' money on diversity, equity, and inclusion positions and programs. Here to discuss the report, I am really pleased to welcome back my guest, Adam Andrzejewski, CEO and founder of Open the Books. Adam, welcome, and thank you for joining me again on Newt's World.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's great to be here. Thank you for your interest in our work. It's great to be back.
Well, before we dive into your March 5th report, could you spend just a couple minutes talking about Open the Books and what your mission is?
Our mission at openthebooks.com can be summarized in the phrase, every dime, online, in real time. It's radical transparency, so people can follow the money, so they can hold the political class accountable for tax and spend decisions. And Newt, for the first time in history at openthebooks.com, we've captured nearly every dime taxed and spent at every level of government. That's federal, state, and local. It took us 55,000 Freedom of Information Act requests last year, and you can search it all for free on our website.
Where would people go for that?
So you go to openthebooks.com, and we're pioneering right now on the website what we think is the most important innovation in American history on public policy. It's called Benjamin the Chatbot. It cost us $7 million to put together. And if you answer 3 easy questions, you can write to your email box the answer to your question on any public spending across the entire country, including the salary of your 5th grade teacher, will be delivered right to your email inbox.
That's amazing. How long have you been doing Open the Books?
So we launched Illinois-centric. And as you know, Illinois is the Super Bowl of corruption. If anything on public policy and politics happens in Illinois for the good, it's entirely by accident. So it was a great training ground. We launched in September of 2011. For the first time ever, we put the pay and pensions of virtually every single Illinois public employee online. Then we realized we could do the entire country. We built the platform scalable, and that's what we've done.
The degree to which you're able to drill down, when you look at your report on March 5th on the University of Virginia, you actually have each employee, and the amount they're paid is amazing. Were you surprised by this?
We really were. Just to put our investigation in context, on the previous Friday, the University of Florida terminated their diversity, equity, and inclusion, their DEI spend, and 28 employees were terminated. They lost their jobs, and the University of Florida said that this saves students and taxpayers $5 million. So immediately at the flagship university right there in Virginia, founded by no less than Thomas Jefferson, we wanted to know what the situation looked like at the University of Virginia. It's one of the top 5 public universities ranked by U.S. News and World Report in the country. And so what we found in our payroll database, and these numbers come right from the university, we captured them via sunshine request from the university. We found 235 university employees, including 82 students, most of which are on the equivalent of a full tuition waiver or a half or 2/3 tuition waiver, working in the DEI departments and agencies at the school. And when we added up their salaries, quite frankly, we were stunned. It was $15 million. And that's not total student and taxpayer cost. You got to add 30% for benefits. You had a $20 million annual spend in the DEI initiatives at the University of Virginia.
If you translate that, say, into undergraduate students, how many students' total payments to the university would it take just to cover the DEI program?
It takes the tuition payments from nearly 1,000 undergraduates just to pay the base salaries of the DEI staffers. Think about this. You've got 17,500 undergraduate students at the university, and 1,000 of them, their full tuition payments are paying for the DEI employees.
If there are 187 University of Virginia employees and students dedicated to, quote, assist and monitor all parts of the university in their efforts to recruit and retain faculty, staff, and students from historically underrepresented groups and to provide affirmative and supportive environments for work and life. That's what they say their mission is. What do they actually do?
Well, that is the big question. They are embedded in every single aspect of the university, from employment decisions, undergraduate student enrollments, this is what they admit, all the way into most likely what's taught in the classroom. For example, you had one of their top DEI staffers that she weighs in on issues of public policy in Appalachia, for crying out loud, and she says that the early deaths in Appalachia are the result of the toxicity of whiteness.
The largely white people in Appalachia are dying because they're white?
If we had to go into what she means by that, she thinks that the privilege of being white in Appalachia is so toxic that the underlying problems of whiteness display themselves in Appalachia in a toxic culture. That's how I would summarize her position. Look, at openthebooks.com, we link to her underlying video. So if you come to our website and if you look at our breaking and launching story that we're talking about here, about the 235 staffers costing $20 million at UVA, if you click on that, you can actually click through to the video where she talks about this.
This one center, they have an equity center, an office for diversity, equity, and inclusion, a multicultural student services, an office of diversity and engagement, and a center for diversity. In addition to 31 people working in DEI roles in other departments, including the urology department. I'm trying to get my head around a DEI role in urology, but it's too embarrassing.
Ronald Reagan said the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Well, Newt, I think we need to upgrade it to the most terrifying 13 words in the English language. I'm your DEI specialist from the urology department and I'm here to help.
But now, the university came back and said you've exaggerated, and they claim only 55 staffers. What's the difference between your reporting and the university?
Yeah, let's talk about this because this is very important. The university is being disingenuous, they're misleading, and they're trying to confuse the issue. They're not being truthful about what their total spend is. So, for example, a little over a year ago, their DEI specialist, Kevin McDonald, in response to a New York Times piece, said they had 40 staffers dedicated to DEI. The university, in terms of a Board of Visitors presentation about a month later, again, a year ago, updated that number to 55. We took a look at, again, their payroll production, and we were able to parse 235 staffers for the total spend of $20 million, including benefits. Here's the deal. We released our database, and no one's called us. Nobody on that database has called us to say, oh, no, we're not a DEI staffer. We shouldn't be on your database. The university hasn't responded on a position-by-position account on that database. We released our information, which is basically a subset of their payroll information that they provided on production to our oversight teams. We've asked twice. We've asked Brian Coy, the chief spokesman of the school, and others at the university for them to provide their database of the 55 staffers. No response. So we filed a Freedom of Information Act request in Virginia for that database. We still haven't received it. Okay, here's the other deal. Brian Coy, he's the spokesman. He used to be the spokesman for the Democratic Party of Virginia. He used to be the spokesman for Governor Terry McAuliffe and Ralph Northam. Okay, so since 2019, he's been at the university. We took a look at his payroll history. In 2019, he was making $162,000. Today, he's making $220,000. They've given him a nearly $60,000 pay increase just since 2019.
They're complaining at one level. If I understand it correctly, there are some University of Virginia staffers that you didn't include that could arguably be included.
Well, that for sure. So, as an example of this, over at the Library Services Department, you have the lead on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, DEI is not in her title. We didn't put her in the database, but her official title is the Librarian for Digital Life. She makes $80,000. When you tack on the cost of benefits, $104,000. She's not in our database because she doesn't have DEI in the position title. However, she's the lead at the library for inclusion, diversity, and equity accessibility at the library system. She's not in our data. She would only add to the costs.
I've obviously taught too many years ago because you did not include in your report the 10 professors in the gender and sexuality department. You know, years ago, the concept of a gender and sexuality department would have been a joke. It would have been a comedy novel or something. Is there actually a gender and sexuality department?
Yeah, there is. And, there's professors that we didn't include in this report. I think many people would find the teachings of these professors radical. So you've got an assistant professor of psychology in that women, gender, and sexuality department, and she makes $102,000 a year. In the spring course catalog at UVA, she may be teaching a class, but we can't find her name in the course catalog. I reached out to her for public comment to ask if she was teaching a class this semester. We received no response. She actually runs the research on intersectionality, sexuality, and empowerment. It's called the RISE Lab at UVA. She speaks and writes about Black female sexuality. She describes herself as a board-certified sexologist, and she speaks online about her orgasms. And again, at openthebooks.com, in the interest of transparency, if people want to check this out, they can click through to where she speaks about these things. You can see it for yourself. These are your tax dollars at work.
Some of this could actually be pretty good for a TV show. She doesn't teach classes, and she's a professor. Were you able to check out, is there such a thing as a board-certified sexologist?
We've been so busy. I just took it at face value, Newt. It did strike me as strange. This is the first time, obviously, I've ever heard about it. I don't know if it's a self-title, or I don't know if at the state level in Virginia, there's a board-certified sexologist now. Nothing, look, I'm from Illinois. I'm green eye shaded. I'm cynical. Nothing would surprise me.
To go beyond the University of Virginia, you also published a report on U.S. taxpayer subsidies to sort of the elite universities, the Ivy League plus Stanford and Northwestern. And you calculate that those federal taxpayer subsidies come to about $45 billion since 2018. Can you walk us through the numbers of how you got there?
Yes, so we took the entire federal checkbook spending, contracts, and grants into the 8 schools of the Ivy League, including Harvard, Yale, and the schools you know about, and we added in Stanford and Northwestern. So you have 10 elite universities, and over the course of a 5-year period between 2018 and 2022, their receipt of taxpayer money through federal agencies exceeded the amount of undergraduate student tuition they collected. So, Newt, today, these elite universities, even though they're mostly private institutions, these elite universities are more federal contractor than they are undergraduate student educator.
It's also why it's so hard to influence them, because the truth is they're financially independent of any kind of pressure other than the government.
And here's why they need to lighten the load on the American taxpayer. While they had collected $33 billion in this 5-year period of federal contracts and grants, they also received the benefit of $12 billion of special tax breaks on their endowment and their investments. So that's $45 billion in a 5-year period, basically funded in one way or another through taxpayers. Then we took a look at the growth of their massive endowments. In that 5-year period, their endowments alone collectively grew by $65 billion, which is a stunning number. Here's the play from our nation's elite universities. On their operating budgets, they bill it off against taxpayers, $45 billion. While they stuff from the private sector through their donor networks the growth of $65 billion on their investment gains and their donations. We did the study that By 2045, just the 8 schools of the Ivy League will have $1 trillion endowment. Basically all the money in the world. They have all the donor connections in the world. They don't need taxpayer help. They should lighten the load on the American taxpayer.
There's a fascinating study by Scott Rasmussen who found that if you looked at people who had graduated from one of these schools, who had an income of above $150,000 a year, and who lived in large cities, that what he called the elite 1%, they are so radically different from everybody else in America that they really do form sort of a totally different world. He said the most frightening single polling number he'd seen in the 35 years he'd been polling. He asked, if you were going to lose an election, would you cheat in order to win? 7% of the country said yes. 65% of the elite 1% said yes. And he cited a woman professor at Harvard who said, I spent my whole life learning how to do the right things, and if only people would calm down and let us alone, we could make their lives much better. And it's just the clearest statement of an oligarchy that's sort of an intellectual oligarchy, but as you point out, it's now also a financial oligarchy. I mean, this is an enormous concentration of money around a small number of extraordinarily well-educated people who think they are superior to the rest of us.
That's stunning. I wasn't aware of that study. That's amazing. It goes right to what the Nobel laureate economist Frederick Hayek outlined years ago, the fatal conceit of the elite. Newt, they think they know better than the rest of us. It's incredible. And look, the nation got a front row seat to the thinking in the congressional hearing when Elise Stefanik asked the 3 presidents of Harvard, MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania. It was a simple question, and they couldn't answer it. And it got 2 of them fired. Stefanik simply asked the presidents of these universities, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate your rules on bullying and harassment? And they could not answer yes. None of the 3 presidents answered yes, and it got 2 of them fired. But it shows you the thinking and the rot at these universities.
Both Florida and Texas have now banned diversity, equity, and inclusion in their public universities. Do you think that's something that other states should follow up on?
Well, I do. I do, because it's the opposite of the American ideal of equal opportunity. When you say in the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, that gives us the opportunity to make something of our lives. And Newt, look, I appreciate this. I'm the beneficiary of this. I grew up in a small town. My family was at or near the federal poverty markers for my entire upbringing. I'm the oldest of 7 kids. And over the course of a 15-year period, I was able to go from my small rural town to one of the most wealthiest communities in the country because I had the opportunity to make something of myself. So I take that very seriously. DEI is the opposite of that. The equity portion says there's equal outcomes. You move away from the merit-based system and you move to an outcome-based system, and that's the opposite. That's radical socialism, that's neo-Marxism, and it needs to be fought.
One of the steps towards fighting it, the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act imposed a tax of 1.4% of investment income for university endowments exceeding $500,000 per student. Should this tax be higher? And if so, would you apply the 20% capital gains tax rate?
Yeah, 23.5%. That's what wealthy Americans pay on capital gains. And many people don't understand why these elite, super wealthy universities are only paying 1.4%. Now, the precedent of the 2017 tax hike on Congress, that was the direct result in the previous spring in 2017 of our reporting at openthebooks.com on the taxpayer subsidy of the Ivy League, that they're more federal contractor than they are educator, and they had amassed all this wealth, and they were knocking down all the taxpayer payments. The Boston Globe cited our work that year as the impetus for the Republican Congress to implement that tax signed by President Trump. But now it's a bipartisan issue. You even have the state legislature in Massachusetts wanting to slap a 2.5 excise tax on the endowments, for instance, at Harvard. So you have state legislatures following up on this, and you have J.D. Vance in the United States Senate. His legislation would hike the tax from 1.4% to 35% capital gains tax on these institutions that have these massive endowments.
That would actually begin to bring in real money.
Well, in Massachusetts, it is real money. It would pay for free education for everybody in the state of Massachusetts in the university system. Now, obviously, Harvard's pushing back aggressively on this. They are spending student tuition dollars, taxpayer dollars. Somebody in Congress needs to hold a hearing and put these university presidents, for instance, at the Ivy League in front of another hearing. Since 2007, according to disclosures, the 8 schools of the Ivy League have spent $12.5 million on lobbying. And you're not supposed to use taxpayer dollars to lobby. So what dollars are they using? Are they using student tuition dollars to lobby? Are they using donor dollars to lobby? They're set up as public charities, 501c3 educational public charities. What dollars are they using to lobby at the local, state, and federal levels? I want to know, and those university presidents in a hearing under oath should tell us.
I think you raise a ton of fascinating issues. You've done really an extraordinary job of putting together this entire project, and it's grown up over a number of years. How old is Open the Books?
We launched in September of 2011 at Illinois-centric at openthebooks.com. So, look, we launched nationally with my opinion editorial at the Wall Street Journal. We took the entire federal checkbook in 2013. It was groundbreaking technology at the time, and we pushed it to your cell phone through a mobile app. And the Wall Street Journal published my editorial. This was our national rollout in 2013 when the legendary Senator Dr. Tom Coburn from Oklahoma, when he left the U.S. Senate, it was about 2015, in the spring of 2015, he then joined openthebooks.com as our honorary chairman. I had the privilege to fight arm in arm with Dr. Coburn for the next 5 years until he passed away right at the start of the pandemic. In 2020, he passed away from cancer, unfortunately, much too early in life. Dr. Coburn and I fought these battles on transparency and accountability at openthebooks.com for that 5-year period.
So if you were the budget committee trying to figure out how to get to a balanced budget over the next decade, this would be one of the great source documents to go in and learn what's absurd and what could be easily cut with no normal taxpayer being affected, but the people who've been living off the land suddenly having a new challenge.
This is pretty incredible. In February of 2020, we had convinced President Donald Trump to run the war on waste, to aggressively embrace the transparency revolution, to audit every dime of federal grant making and contracts, and then communicate with the American people. That 3-prong approach can be used by any government executive, whether you're heading up a county, a mayor of a city, whether you're a governor of a state, and we encourage that. The president had adopted that into the fiscal year 2021 budget. I got to break that budget in my then column at Forbes. It cited and referenced our organization by name in 2 sections of the report. Number 1, they were committed to ending the corrupt practice at the federal level of use it or lose it spending. When the agencies spend down their budget this year to get the same or more money from Congress next year, and they cited our work and hyperlinked to our website in that section. They also used our findings on the National Endowment of the Arts and Humanities to suggest eliminating those agencies. We had found that 80% of their grant making went to well-heeled, rich arts organization, not the starving artist. So Newt, your call there to use us as a resource, spot on. We had convinced Trump to run that. That was 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. And obviously all those plans were thrown out the window as the nation pivoted during the pandemic years.
I often do work with the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is, I think, 1,500 or 1,600 state legislators. And obviously every state legislature should be going to your website, openthebooks.com, and learning about the waste and the inappropriate spending in their own government.
In San Diego at the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, at their annual meeting. I was the lunchtime speaker. I actually followed Scott Rasmussen at that lunch, who had great poll results to share with the group. And I made the point on the Read the Bill legislation. This was a public policy campaign that we had run for 2 years. We put this in the Wall Street Journal. I talked frequently about it on C-SPAN. We ran a grassroots petition that got tens of thousands of signatures. The campaign was so effective that when Kevin McCarthy became Speaker, he wrote it into the House rules, 72-hour timeout after the final piece of legislation to simply read the bill. Newt, I think it's a 99% issue with the American people, left, right, and center. AOC backs this proposal, for crying out loud. But with the change in speakers, I think that rule went out the window because it was accompanied by the single subject legislation rule. And obviously, we just last week had the omnibus spending bill with everything rolled into one. It was dropped on a Sunday, voted through Congress on both chambers by Friday. And so I think they've moved away from that rule. I think that rule got trashed when the change of speaker happened.
Well, sometimes new reforms are like Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill. You know, you roll it up, it comes back down. You roll it up, it comes back down. And then every once in a while, you actually get it to the top of the hill. And that's when you have a great historic moment. Adam, I think openthebooks.com, and I've always felt this way from the time I first ran into it, is an amazing project that represents a real investment in citizenship. I want to thank you for joining me, for helping us understand with clarity where all this money at major universities is being spent. And I want to remind our listeners, they can learn more about the work you're doing at openthebooks.com. Thank you very much, Adam, for being with me.
Newt, thank you very much. Thank you for being a champion of transparency and accountability.
Thank you to my guest, Adam Andrzejewski. You can learn more about Open the Books on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan, and our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcast and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.